Hey, Ryan Reynolds here. Wishing you a very happy half-off holiday because right now Mint Mobile is offering you the gift of 50% off unlimited. To be clear, that's half price, not half the service. And Mint is still premium unlimited wireless for a great price. So that means a half day, yeah?
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Grief doesn't keep a calendar. Anxiety doesn't clock out after 5. Depression doesn't care if it's your busy season. But support can still fit into your life. With Grow, you can find a therapist who meets you where you are. They connect you with thousands of independent licensed therapists across the U.S., offering both virtual and in-person sessions. You can search by insurance, provider specialty, treatment methods, and more to find a therapist who works for you. And if it's not the right fit, switching is easy. There are no subscriptions, no long-term commitments. You just pay per session. Find therapy on your time. Evenings, weekends, and cancel up to 24 hours in advance at no cost. Whatever challenges you're facing, Grow Therapy is here to help. Sessions average about $21 with insurance, and some pay as little as $0 depending on their plan. Visit growtherapy.com/ACAST today to get started. That's growtherapy.com/ACAST. growtherapy.com/ACAST. Availability and coverage vary by state and insurance plan.
Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. And today I want to kind of talk a bit about tax, which is the kind of the death knell of all kind of lively and interesting conversation. But it is an important one, and I wanted to kind of talk about it sort of situated within the context of contemporary UK political discourse around taxation and inequality. So, the Green Party have obviously taken a leftward move recently and flanked the Labour Party on the left in virtually every regard, and are, by several opinion polls, more popular than the Labour Party. The stated aim of the Green Party is to replace the Labour Party as the party of the left, which isn't really very hard when you have Keir Starmer echoing Tory ideas, which were, designed to chase reform ideas, and reform ideas were initially kind of modulated around the ideas of Enoch Powell and people even further to the right. What's happened is extreme right-wing, the sorts of things that are National Front pamphlets in the 1970s have filtered their way into mainstream political discourse, the extent to which the Labour Party are echoing them now. So outflanking the Labour Party on the left is hardly difficult. One of the things that Zach Polanski, the leader of the Green Party, has said right from the get-go, right from his election campaign for leadership of the Green Party, all the way through to his leadership of the party now. Tax the rich. Okay, tax the rich to pay public services. Now, the kind of the crime that comes back from not just the rich, because you don't really hear from them. The point of being extremely rich is you get other people to make your arguments for you. You don't go and do it yourself. But those that kind of carry water for the extremely rich, people who are in their own right quite wealthy, but certainly not. They don't have billions tucked away. Is that the rich people? Rich do pay tax. In fact, they pay tax, all the tax that they need to pay, all the tax that the law says they should pay. And well, the fact they're not in prison would indicate that, or that they're very, very gifted in tax avoidance at the very, very least. And there is, in fairness, a body of what UK, what I think they call like progressive or patriotic millionaires, people saying, look, we should pay tax. It's nice to have a society to exist in. And that's, I think, the paying tax to fund public services is, it's kind of true that we need to do that. But also it misses a wider point about why one taxes the extremely wealthy. And to understand that, we need to kind of look at Henry VII. Okay. So, Henry VII was a pretender to the throne, an heir to the throne, who returned from France with no money. He'd been in an exile. He'd been the kind of the Targaryens in Game of Thrones, sort of the penniless exile. And he'd returned back to back to England to challenge Richard III. He manages to win at the Battle of Bosworth, but when he is crowned, he's relatively poor. Why? Because the crown itself had been relatively poor, and he himself had been in exile. So he sits on the throne and he notices that the nobles have lots of money, lots of land, because Henry VI had given it away, and big armies. And this is worrying to him. What do? Do you fight them all, defeat them all, and thus restart 30 years of the War of the Roses? No, you tax them. Why? Because we're still in the Middle Ages. We are long before we have any sort of more meaningful, more modern structures of power. The crown must be sovereign. The crown must be preeminent. The crown must have power. And how does the crown have power? It must have a monopoly on, or not necessarily a pure monopoly, but it must have an overwhelming majority of the wealth of the land. So he fines and taxes those Yorkists that had fought against him. He doesn't really, I think there's one or two that are executed, but virtually nobody. There is no kind of mass violent punishment, but he makes them swear oaths of loyalty, and what they will lose is their lands and their wealth if they rise up against him. And he taxes and taxes and taxes. And he's got a cash pile that he's sat on by the time he dies, which obviously Henry VIII inherits and spends a lot in about 3 years. What does this tell us? It tells us that, above all things, sovereign power must prevent the overmighty noble. Now, here in the 21st century, we are surrounded by overmighty nobles. I mean, one of the reasons why we have the problems that we have is that people with extreme wealth, once they've bought up everything else, they can buy political power, and it's very easy. It's extremely cheap to buy. Britain does not do corruption in the ways that other countries do, or the kind of on the the scale and the ambition of other countries, British politicians are cheap to purchase, and both parties, the Conservatives and the Labour Party and the Reform Party, are explicit, proud even, about the extent to which they've been corrupted by private wealth, by private capital. So they are able to say all sorts of kind of fictitious things, like, we're listening to the interests of business. No, you're listening to the interests of capital, which is not the same thing. Somebody that has inherited a fortune, that isn't necessarily risking it by establishing some kind of manufacturing industry in the UK, can still influence and purchase an awful lot of political power. So that's one reason for tax, that billionaires represent an existential threat to democracy because they can buy it. Elon Musk bought Donald Trump the presidency with something like $250 million in donations, which is, a quarter of 1 billion, of which, he has now is a 1/4000th of his wealth, and he bought a presidency. So that's pretty bad. The other thing is the concentration of resources. We exist in a largely rentier capitalist society. We're not the kind of, in the heyday of industrial capitalism, and probably in the Western world will never be that again. Instead, we have places where lazy money likes to hang out. Lean money that has to work hard, is invested in new robotics engineering plants and biomedical science labs and things like that, stuff that makes the really cutting edge things of the future, but it's risky. You can lose your shirt in that 100%. Lazy money likes to own properties, and unless we are producing more properties than private lazy money can purchase, we're always going to have shortages. Shortages mean higher prices, and it's a great way to ring fence crucial resources and charge access to them. So we will have a kind of like a renting and a rentier class, ultimately, in the future, given the version of capitalism that we currently have, unless, of course, you impoverish the rent-seeking class and you tax it really until, in terms of billionairedom, it doesn't exist anymore. This is kind of obviously extremely radical stuff, and because the various sort of rent seekers control things like national newspapers, the political discourse is unlikely to shift that way. And in fact, when you see huge donations being given to Nigel Farage and Reform, one of the reasons why that's happening, these guys aren't stupid. They know the unimaginable chaos that a Reform government is going to introduce, but they know that a Reform government will be a faithful attack dog against anybody threatening the interests of private capital. So that's a big part of the reason why someone like Farage can attract all these these donations. There's a clear existential reason why, but also there is a system of kind of thought production that begins with right-wing think tanks in Tufton Street in the UK and in other places that co-opt elements of academia. They mix that with connections in the media, and they present a compelling argument through these very opaque organizations that are there to help shape public discourse in the interests of the super rich. Things like the laughably called Taxpayers Alliance, that is there essentially to ensure that tax for certain people isn't paid. You know, nobody from the Taxpayers Alliance ever really discloses who funds them. And gradually, and this was again, it's one of the central tenets of neoliberal practice, that over the decades, neoliberal thinkers like Hayek and Friedman and von Mises and people like that said, you have to understand and control and channel where ideas come and go. You have to shape discourse and shape what it is we think is normal, natural, desirable, okay. And this has been done with spectacular success. The idea that increases in taxes on billionaires will somehow impoverish us all, that painter decorators and hairdressers somehow have common class interests with the Duke of Westminster or with somebody who is the owner of a hedge fund, and that when this is one of these kind of great mass delusions of our times, and it's not a mass delusion that's the result of somebody else's inability to understand things. It's the result of kind of constant and relentless propaganda.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. One of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Grief doesn't keep a calendar. Anxiety doesn't clock out after 5. Depression doesn't care if it's your busy season. But support can still fit into your life. With Grow, you can find a therapist who meets you where you are. They connect you with thousands of independent licensed therapists across the U.S., offering both virtual and in-person sessions. You can search by insurance, provider specialty, treatment methods, and more to find a therapist who works for you. And if it's not the right fit, switching is easy. There are no subscriptions, no long-term commitments. You just pay per session. Find therapy on your time. Evenings, weekends, and cancel up to 24 hours in advance at no cost. Whatever challenges you're facing, Grow Therapy is here to help. Sessions average about $21 with insurance, and some pay as little as $0 depending on their plan. Visit growtherapy.com/ACAST today to get started. That's growtherapy.com/ACAST. growtherapy.com/ACAST. Availability and coverage vary by state and insurance plan.
Marshall's buyers are hustling hard to get amazing new gifts into stores right up to the last minute. Like a designer perfume for that friend who never RSVP'd. Wishlist topping toys for her kids who came too. Belgian chocolates for the neighbor, a cozy scarf for your boss, and a wool jacket for your husband that you definitely did not almost forget. Marshalls, we get the deals, you gift the good stuff, even at the last minute. Whew! Find a Marshalls near you.
It's fair to say, probably, if one taxed wealth in the UK in the ways that have been proposed, that it won't generate the kinds of epic sums that Britain needs in order to reverse 15, now getting on nearly almost for 16 years of decline. Britain, David Cameron put a little kind of Facebook social media thing the other day saying, hooray, 20 years since I took the job as leader of the Conservative Party. Wow, what a rush. And yeah, what a rush for all of us. I mean, what has happened in that time is that austerity, I think there was a thing, Novara Media made this point, austerity is essentially kind of almost like de-developed the UK. When you've had such enormous cuts to social welfare, to local authority spending, so that facilities, everything from libraries to swimming pools to parks to health and safety inspectors to the people that mow the grass verges or what have you, all these services have been either shut down or, even worse, outsourced. So the services are still provided, but the assets are purchased. Things like, for example, here in Cardiff, St David's Hall, that was once owned by the council, has been sold off for an attractive sum, no doubt, to a private conglomerate. The basic infrastructure of everyday life is privatized. I mean, austerity was one thing that isn't kind of realized about it. Austerity was a wave of massive stealth privatization. It wasn't kind of national utilities like water or gas that were bought, but it was your local your local sports centre. It was the services for elderly people that essentially are, the local authority run services are axed, and then they have to be replaced by much more expensive privately provided ones. And it's on what austerity provided, once again, for an asset owning class, was a new opportunity to bilk the state. And again, capital is lazy. It goes to where the easiest lunch is, and why wouldn't it? So we've seen once again during the kind of the austerity years, this huge surge of wealth upwards, and then there's a squeezed middle that pay exorbitant council taxes and then wonder why it is services decay year in, year out. And it is because there is this kind of flow of wealth upwards. So a very, very good reason to tax the rich is to do what Henry VII did, and to reduce the wealth and power, not of the middle tier rich. I mean, there's no, it doesn't really matter very much if people sitting on £1 million are affected or not. It matters an awful lot that people with £100 million or £500 million or £1 billion or more in cash and assets have less economic power and less political power. This, you might say, sounds totalitarian. Why is it that somebody who is extremely wealthy and they've done very well for themselves in this kind of Horatio Alger story kind of way, there were some Dick Whittington character that went to London town with only the shirt on their back, and then they became magically rich one day. Why should they not have as much say in the running of things as anybody else? And the answer is of course, is because it's profoundly undemocratic, and because when people accumulate large quantities of wealth and they purchase political power, they then use that political power to consolidate the wealth that they already have. And so what we never manage to achieve is a healthy pluralistic society. Instead, it entrenches inequality and ensures that inequality is, a lasting feature. That's how we descend from mid-20th century social democracy. When we get to the year 1975, inequality was at its lowest level. Housing was public housing was at its highest level ever. And then in 1976, Healy and Callaghan essentially embrace neoliberalism through an IMF loan. They take on board Britain's first real structural adjustment program. There are some economic pundits that argue that the IMF loan was entirely unnecessary, and Healy and Callaghan, who were not to the left of the Labour Party, they were centrist, even slightly more right figures in the Labour Party, quite happy to take it on, and looked at some aspects of the kind of incoming wave of Thatcherism and rather agreed with it. That Bernard Donahue who was one of the kind of the number 10 staff at the time, said, if we'd have put council house privatisation in our 1979 manifesto, we'd have won. So the moment of the social democratic moment in Great Britain that lasted, I think, I would argue, from 45 to 75, went into steep reverse after that, and then into reverse even more so after 1979. And we live in a society which is the upside down version of that. It is the flip side of that. It is a society where there are 40% of the population live in poverty, where we have child poverty at epic levels, where we have children who, because of the 2-child cap in the past 15 years, there is a generation of British children with stunted growth, and to think of that, and to think of the kind of almost the Dickensian nature of that, while we have people who have more money and more resources than they can possibly spend in a lifetime, in multiple lifetimes.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. One of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Grief doesn't keep a calendar. Anxiety doesn't clock out after 5. Depression doesn't care if it's your busy season. But support can still fit into your life. With Grow, you can find a therapist who meets you where you are. They connect you with thousands of independent licensed therapists across the U.S., offering both virtual and in-person sessions. You can search by insurance, provider specialty, treatment methods, and more to find a therapist who works for you. And if it's not the right fit, switching is easy. There are no subscriptions, no long-term commitments. You just pay per session. Find therapy on your time. Evenings, weekends, and cancel up to 24 hours in advance at no cost. Whatever challenges you're facing, Grow Therapy is here to help. Sessions average about $21 with insurance, and some pay as little as $0 depending on their plan. Visit growtherapy.com/ACAST today to get started. That's growtherapy.com/ACAST. growtherapy.com/ACAST. Availability and coverage vary by state and insurance plan.
Seeking to entrench that position and seeking to purchase political and media power in order to ensure that. And I haven't even talked about the purchasing of media power, which is the other kind of flip side of this, because there's no time in this rant. That's why taxing billionaires makes sense. Now, that might be something that is too much for public discourse to take. We are kind of our sort of instinct towards siding with those at the top. It's quite powerful in Great Britain. I mean, probably is in most places. But if you don't do this, if a society doesn't take the extremes of wealth and balance them out to some extent, then what will happen is the people with that kind of predatory kind of instinct to accumulate will continue to do so. And ultimately, to the great destabilization of society, perhaps it is the conditions that create revolutions. I mean, social democracy, from Bismarck's social reforms all the way through to the New Deal, all the way through to the kind of the various European post-war settlements. The whole point of it, of giving poor people a better crack of the whip, was to steer them away from more violent and revolutionary solutions. And it's generally believed, or has been believed since the end of the Cold War, that those solutions don't exist anymore. I wouldn't be so sure. I would not be so sure. Because it's something that always exists on some level. Anyway, there you go. Tax the rich. And I'll catch you on the next Explaining History podcast. All the best. Bye-bye.
From Adams Morgan to Anacostia Park, we all want safer neighborhoods. But what does real safety mean? Real safety means preventing crime before it happens. By having police work with communities to disrupt cycles of violence. By supporting families with stable housing. And providing more mental health and drug treatment. We know that adding more police and locking up more people doesn't make us safer. Real safety means investing in the things that help prevent crime. Learn more at RealSafetyDC.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.